So glad to have our listeners back on Mastering Counseling today. We are thrilled to have Khara Croswaite Brindle with us today. She is the clinician and owner of Croswaite Counseling, as well as a financial therapist, and has also done a lot of work on TED Talks, and she is an author on Amazon. So she has her hands in a lot of things in a really good way. So thank you for giving us your time today, Khara.
Yeah, thanks, Becky, for having me. Lots we can talk about.
Yeah, I'm so excited to talk about all the different things you're doing, and especially and then how you're managing all that, because a big part of your practice is therapist burnout and that sort of thing. So yeah, why don't you maybe first talk about how you were working, I think, in agencies and everything, and then you went out on your own.
Yeah, so typical of a lot of green therapists, started my career in community mental health because that's where we're hired and get supervision and whatnot. So I did that for 4 years. In that 4 years, I was promoted to a clinical supervisor after getting licensed, and then had a team of my own 15 green therapists underneath me. So that probably was the start of my first burnout round, if I'm being honest, having that many clinicians working under me and having lots of questions. Part of that was our population. We were working with a lot of abuse and neglect cases, really, with families and DHS. So there was always a lot going on. I always said, never boring.
That is what I say at my job. Never boring. Common phrase. But yeah, such hard issues for sure.
Yeah, like lots going on there. So I went off into private practice, started with at-risk youth and families on my own, and then moved into grad students. Now I have a small caseload of medical students that have mental health challenges, are already in burnout before they're even in the field kind of folks. So love working with them in addition to my major population, which is other therapists right now.
Yeah. All right. I love that you have such a wide realm of experience. That's amazing.
Thank you.
We kind of talked about the counseling again. Let's get a little bit overview about you as a certified financial therapist. And what does that career angle look like and in the day-to-day? That's something we haven't talked about as much on this, so we'd love to hear about it.
Yeah. So, and we get that a lot where people are like, what is financial therapy? So it's a pretty young discipline compared to some of the other mental health work that's out there. It's only been around since 2008 by name and trademark and all the things. So really young discipline compared to what we've all been trained in as mental health professionals. But it's booming, and it's for a good reason, which is money is emotional. So a lot of us who are specializing in financial therapy, there are two home disciplines. It's either mental health folks or certified financial planners coming into that designation with this idea that we're helping people work on their relationship with money. So thoughts, feelings, behaviors. So of course the mental health folks are like, we do this in our sleep. Now we're just doing it with money. So I discovered financial therapy in the pandemic. I was we're gonna have to edit that. I was seeking a change because I'd worked with heavy trauma for quite a few years. I was feeling another round of burnout and knew what it looked like and felt like it was like, probably shouldn't ignore it this time because I did the first time. And so I was interviewing colleagues for a project, and one of them was a financial therapist, and I was really intrigued. I had never heard of that before in the mental health world. So within 20 minutes of interviewing her, I had this vision of becoming a financial therapist, was really excited to see how it integrated with the stuff I was doing with therapists. And pitched to be her mentee and work under her and learn all the craft, and then pursued certification not just a year later. So it's been a fast-paced journey, but I really love financial therapy, and I love working with therapists in that way.
Yeah. So some people would be a financial therapist for anyone in the population, and then yours is even honed down to often therapists who have need financial therapy. Is that correct?
Yeah. So we've got people who are working with families, couples. We have people who are working with people going through divorce, right? So any specialty population, financial therapy could apply. My population just tends to be therapists because I do a lot of different things for them, as you kind of saw in my bio.
Right, for sure. All right, that's so interesting. I love that. How, because you mentioned like financial planners and everything, and then you're dealing more with the emotional end. How much do you get into like the nitty-gritty of people's actual budgets and numbers? Or do you stay completely away and it's all about how they're processing it and living their life dealing with the financial stresses? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah. And
Okay.
I get that question a lot actually of like, what does it really look like in the room? So obviously it's customized to each client of what they want to work on. I have been known to have them log into a bank account to get the emotional transactions of it and like
Mhm.
show me, tell me what's going on for you as you see all these purchases, or if you see Amazon or you see Eating Out or DoorDash. Like we have such an emotional response to food and social activities that those are the first things we try to cut when we're trying to fit a budget. And
Mhm.
so there's like this natural exposure therapy that happens where I'm not looking at like their account information per se. I'm having them in real time tell me what's showing up as they're looking at these things
Okay.
emotionally, from a place of shame, from a place of like, what's your inner critic telling you right now? So
Mhm.
sometimes it's that kind of exercise. A lot of times it's just the noticing of the somatic experience of, hey, we're talking about debt. What showed up for you? Hey, we're talking about credit cards. What showed up for you?
Well,
What beliefs do you have about wealth, about poverty, about savings? And so there's a lot of work around those aspects where we're not necessarily jumping into all the number stuff, but it might
mhm.
come into it in some kind of way.
Okay. Great explanation. Yeah, that's so interesting. So I'm sure a lot of these ideas are what are happening in your books that you've written. Why don't you talk about those a little bit and their main topics and where we can find those?
Yeah, so I actually have 8 books out right now at the time of our recording. The first book I ever wrote was a clinical supervision book with the supervisor that promoted me back in community mental health. So that
Right.
came full circle. We decided to show a different model of supervision, which is the empowerment model, and actually created some trainings and things around that. So that's
Or
my second business even now as we speak.
okay.
So that was my first book in 2019. I've written pretty much a book a year since then. I think I'm a little addicted to writing when I'm
Yeah.
not doing all the other projects.
Yeah.
But I've written books on workaholism because that's a population I love to serve, i.e.,
Mhm.
medical students. Uh, or
Yeah.
I've written on thyroid conditions and professional helpers of like, hey, I'm noticing a population of women being diagnosed, and here are some of the things to think about: burnout, vicarious trauma, chronic stress. And then more recently, I put out some books on mother-daughter estrangement. So I
Yeah.
put out a clinical book for clinicians who are working with those adult daughters. And then just a couple months ago, launched a children's book of how to have families talk about family estrangement with kids. That was a really fun project and a different kind of writing, obviously, writing a children's
Yeah.
book, right?
Yes.
Um,
Oh, go
Go ahead.
ahead.
I was
I
to
was gonna
say,
say that was the one that stood out to me on
yeah,
your website, the mother-daughter. It's so particular and I have 2 daughters of my own. So it was yeah, it really because everyone thinks like it's gonna be always great and fine, but then more and more people I meet, there
well,
are many issues in that relationship, which is so important, but can then therefore be so difficult. So
yeah, yeah. Well, and they
yeah.
say 1 in 12 people is estranged from a family member right now. So when I was
Yeah.
doing the research for that book, I was kind of shocked that it was more common than even I realized. I'd seen lots of clients come in, mostly women, doing this work. And of course, it didn't escape me that I wrote that book when my daughter was 4 months old. So as
Yeah.
mothers, I'm also like, what's this about?
Right.
But found it to be a really rewarding book and for a lot of adult daughters to feel seen because there's a lot of books out there for parents, but not as many for the adult daughter saying, I had to make this difficult choice. And
Mhm.
so that book showed up. And then I have another book coming out in a couple more months. So
All
just keep going.
right. That is amazing. Are you, this is kind of off track. Do you just wake up in the middle of the night with these huge ideas or they build over time? Or, because that is a good, that's a lot of writing,
Yeah.
especially since it's not your sole form of income.
Yeah, yeah, and I would say it's probably a smaller sliver of income, really, when you think about book sales trickling in.
Mhm.
So a lot of these books I had an idea, and then it was a couple of years before I had space to write them. And
Mhm.
then getting a couple book deals with publishers really helped because then there was a natural deadline of like, we need your 40,000 words by this date.
Yeah.
And I liked working with a publisher, so this next book is with the same one. But yeah, the mother and daughter one, I did a lot more writing for fun in the pandemic because a lot of us
And
had more space than we expected. And It was
Yeah.
something I felt like I could control. I
Mm-hmm.
actually had a little bit more workaholism show up then too, if I'm being
Mm-hmm.
honest.
Okay.
Just trying to find something to fill the void of what's happening and the
Mm-hmm.
unknown. And so that book, I started with a blog and I said, hey, colleagues, are you seeing this pattern with mothers and daughters as clinicians? And they said, yep, we are. So at that point, I knew it was going to be a future book. I just needed the space. And for some
Okay.
reason, I decided to write on my maternity leave with a 4-month-old.
Wow. Unreal. No,
Yeah,
I
not for
feel that
everyone.
in I could see some people, the workaholism, you had more time, but you never had the separation. If you were used to going to work and coming home, you could
Yeah.
never break it off. And it was like the constant checking of emails, the constant communication, really 24/7. So,
Okay.
yeah. Well, congratulations on all your books and the future books. And then you also have done several TED Talks. Are they usually related to the books or more of topics in general? Or tell us about how those came about.
Yeah. So right now I've only done one TED Talk, but I would like to do more. So that's fun to say on this recording with you. The TED Talk I did was in 2021, and it was on the burden of busyness. So very much around this workaholism. My Amazon bestseller is my book Perfectioner, From Workaholic to Well Balanced. And so those strategies for this like driven person who has no time is what I talked about in that TEDx.
Okay.
My most proud moment of that TEDx is that I did it 7 months pregnant with my daughter. So I
Oh,
tell people
wow.
she's already a public speaker, which luckily she didn't kick me in the diaphragm as I was trying to talk at the time. But
Yeah.
yeah, most people have a fear of public speaking. And then here I was doing it 7 months pregnant. So that's kind of a
Yeah.
fun part of my story.
Very inspiring for sure. Cause, you know, we're always worried about something like that. I can imagine YouTube, it's out there forever. People can
Yeah.
find it. So that's amazing. I love that you did that at 7 months pregnant for sure. Um, so let's talk a little bit about the financial therapy and moving that in, and if you encountered some difficulties with that being a newer discipline. Did you give the space for the clients and it took longer for them to come, or were you overwhelmed with too many? Do you find it maybe hard to collaborate because it's such a new discipline? Talk to us about the challenges of that.
Yeah. So because it is such a young discipline, there's still a lot of work being done around parameters of how it shows up in the room. So we
Mm.
have some folks that are taking financial therapy skills back to their home discipline. So whether that's mental health, like you and I, or certified financial planners taking those skills into their own home discipline. That's one way it's looking. Another subset of people are saying, I'm making financial therapy my true practice. Like that's all I do. And so they're embodying whatever it means to be a financial therapist, saying, this is what I do. So for
Mhm.
me, when I first was mentoring underneath this person who'd been doing it for 8 years, it was a lot of just learning the skills. I was a sponge. I was like soaking it all in. How can I use this with the people I'm serving?
Mhm.
Started doing some of that work with my mental health clients if it fit the goals that they had, if it fit their treatment plan. And then I was like, you know what? I'm moving towards working with more colleagues. So all of the people I want to work with are therapists. And so then it became its own thing of like standalone. Here's my therapeutic consultation. Financial therapy is part of that. Here's other consultation services I offer. And so therapists were like able to pick and choose. This is what I want from you. As
Okay.
listeners are realizing, I have my hands in lots of cookie jars. And so
Mhm.
they wanted to know what it was like to do a TEDx or to write a book or to do financial therapy. And
Mm.
so this is their way of being able to tap into all of that is through consultation. So it
Okay.
hasn't been hard. It's been a journey of just the last couple of years getting more clear of who I want to work with this skill. And so
Gotcha.
going from I want to work with entrepreneurs and small business owners to saying I want to narrow this down to therapists has been really helpful for people to
Yeah.
say, who should I send to Khara versus the other 90 plus certified financial therapists. So even that pool isn't that large when I say there's like 90 of us in the US.
Wow. Yeah, that's really, yeah, well, I'm glad we're talking about it on here so more people can maybe delve into that or get the help if they need it. So very cool. Um One thing I'm thinking with your hand in all the cookie jars, I think is how you said it.
Yeah.
Not all, sorry, that's so bad, but in a lot, which I'm a person of variety, so I totally hear that. I do not like to have the same structure of my day at all. So, but let's just talk about your scheduling, planning. of your routines, do you focus by the day? Do you give like, this is the day I see clients, this is the day I work on writing? Is it all very fluid? But how do you manage your schedule alongside of your work home life balance?
Yeah, yeah. I think that's the thing is people assume I don't sleep with all the things that I accomplish. And I can assure you I get my 8 to 9 hours because I do have some structure that you're looking into with me as we're talking. So part of that is having a 2-year-old at home right now at the time of this recording. So a lot of my schedule has to be limited because when she's around, I'm not going to not be present for her. And so I do a lot of things like get up super early so that I get work done before she wakes up, or I do a couple hours of work after she goes to bed. And by work, I mean I really live for the creativity and the projects. So I might be building something. I'm not seeing clients late at night or early morning. Those are daylight hours. But for a lot of people, just hearing that I have like 2 hours in the morning by myself and an hour at night that I'm accomplishing these things really speaks to where I'm fitting it all in. I don't tend to restrict what kind of days I have things going on. I do recognize a lot of us need some time to transition of like, oh, I'm in professor mode, or oh, I'm going into consultant mode, or now I'm seeing a client. That does take mental energy, but I tend to like the variety in a day where I might have like 2 consultations, 1 financial therapy session, and 1 meeting, for example.
Gotcha.
But I do like a 6-hour work day, technically.
Okay.
For people who want to know.
Right. No, I like that. I think I would be the same, do some meetings, do some writing, space it out a little bit. And yeah, it's good to hear. I know there's a lot of talk. I don't know if it's this year or other years, but that 5 a.m. hour, the people, the like lost, or not the lost hour, the special hour. I don't know what the word is, but I'm not there yet. But occasionally when I am, it is very special. You feel so accomplished by 7 a.m. So
yeah. It's not for everyone though. I was just having that conversation yesterday with my students because they were like, you're here, a professor. I'm a professor 1 day a week. So it's not like a big part of my life right now. But, I was saying I do get up at 5 a.m. and that works for me, but that doesn't work for everyone. Right? Like, what is your true schedule? Are you a night owl? Do you like to be awake early in the morning? For me, I want uninterrupted time. So it's like, where could I fit that? Okay, 5 to 7 before my daughter's awake. So like, for those of us that like fixate and are like, I want to drop in and really do hard work, we get more irritated and frustrated if it's disrupted. So it's like, where can we find 2 hours to write, 1 hour to write, 20 minutes to write? So a lot of my writing was done early morning or late at night because no one was bothering me. There was no text messages pinging and stuff.
Right.
That helped a lot.
Very true. Yeah, and I agree. Some people, it's funny when you just know people, they are so dedicated to their early routine. And then others, I feel like the early routine gets all the credit, but I have some friends who will say, what about the people who stay up till 1 a.m. and we get our whole house clean from 11 to 1? Like, how about that credit? Just because we sleep till 9. So yeah, I did want to mention as well that you are also a professor. So what course are you teaching at what college or university? What is that about?
Yeah, so I am proud to be teaching as an alum of my program, which is at the University of Denver here in Denver, Colorado. And it's the counseling master's program. So all of those folks are future therapists in training, future licensed professional counselors, the designation here in Colorado. And so I typically teach the basic and intermediate techniques, which is the, foundational stuff of becoming a therapist, active listening, immediacy, challenging, all good and fine. I love to tell stories and get them wide awake because it's an 8:30 a.m. class every quarter, which is brutal.
Yeah.
But then more recently, I actually pitched to teach private practice class. So now we have an elective where students are learning in their master's program what it looks like to do private practice, which has been missing for decades in this program. And so other programs are kind of looking at me and looking at DU and saying, do we need this? Do we have this? Do we have someone else teach it? So like, I'm just really excited to see that there's interest because the students have been asking for this for years. Even if we're not hopping into private practice right after master's program, like I'm not here to champion that. I thought I learned a lot in community mental health, but like, do they know the pros and cons? Do they know how to run a business? Do they know how to market, niche down, all the things that I'm sure other guests have talked to you about? And so I'm really proud to be able to do that a couple times a year now, hopefully for many years from now, is my
Yeah.
plan, but just about to do that again this spring with students. So, hey, let's have 15 of you come in, learn what private practice is about, the business side, because we're not business trained people usually. And then I also got the green light to do a financial therapy class for those students. So they're going to learn
Wow.
financial therapy skills, which is pretty awesome. I'm excited.
Yeah. That is amazing. I feel like good ideas come from you and then people follow up. So, no, that's awesome. And great to hear about the business end of things being taught in to have that knowledge in a private practice is good because often we have people on here who are totally in the business side teaching the therapists and counselors because they have no idea. Um,
Exactly.
and then some like you that have experienced it and then are now passing it along. So, and are these classes online or in person?
In person so far. So they haven't done the
Okay.
hybrid model, or we're not scaling it out to community members just yet. But
Yeah.
I imagine some of your listeners might be like, how do I get my hands in that class? Or like, how do I get that content?
Yeah. Yeah. That's so awesome that you're doing that for sure. All right, let's go in another route because it was also mentioned that you have developed some suicide assessment tools and continuing education about that. So, when did you develop it and where is it being presented? You know, is it just in your practice or in other spaces?
Yeah. So as listeners are taking in all the things I do, this is like one of my passion points that's been around since 2017. So I've been training clinicians on suicide assessment since 2017. That started with those 15 green clinicians. They were coming out of school. I was their supervisor, and they're like, I have no idea how to assess for suicide. It was
Yeah.
1 hour, if any, in their program, which I thought was
Wow.
baffling and really scary,
Yeah.
actually, to say
Yeah.
on this, right? Like an hour of training on suicide assessment. Cool.
Yeah.
So at that point, I saw this pain point that we had, which is we're not talking about it. We don't feel prepared. And yet the community is being told, go tell a therapist.
Yeah.
So at that point, I created the training. Then in 2018, I created an app for school professionals and mental health professionals to use with their clients to say, hey, I'm sitting alongside you. We're asking some questions about suicide and we're safety planning, all of that. And then in late 2018, I created a nonprofit to house some of it. Unfortunately, that nonprofit didn't survive the pandemic, with a lot of nonprofits not surviving it. But at the time, it was there in Colorado to support the trainings, getting out there at a broader scale and to reduce youth suicide, because that was our population we were focused on, was 10 to 24-year-olds. Colorado is always in the top 10 states for high suicide rates. So it was very relevant here and everywhere, really. So long story short, I've been doing trainings every year since then for clinicians, both nationally and internationally, as they've said, hey, I need more training. Give me something useful, make it engaging, which I do. Not that your listeners can see me, but I talk with my hands a lot. And so the app is still available for mental health professionals of any state, but the resources section would be specific to Colorado clinicians.
Okay.
So it's an assessment, a screener, resources, and a safety plan that people log into and have access to for their client work. And then this latest book I'm writing, or it has actually been written, that's publishing, is on how to heal from client suicide. So I'm really looking at the whole clinician, saying, what is your experience with the stress of assessing, and what is your experience with the grief and loss of a client dying? And so that's where I'm really headed, is true passion. How do we help clinicians feel prepared for the worst thing that could happen, or one of the worst things that could happen in their career?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I work at an elementary school and a lot of times people think, you don't need to deal with that. But yeah, amazingly, we've had some really good trainings, much longer than an hour,
Good. I'm
that I've
glad to
been
hear
to
it.
over the years. Yeah. One was just last year. It was actually like a two full days, very intense. It's a lot, but you just, and honestly, I mean, who really learns it in one training, right? It's like,
Yeah.
unfortunately, almost going through it. And then when you're in a school, they have their own protocols. But there's always, the person side of it. How does this look, especially for minors? So yeah, hopefully it is improving, at least on people being prepared, since we are being called upon to on my end, it's more evaluating and then getting them to the therapist.
Right.
So, yeah, well, thank you for doing that work. Um, you mentioned kind of all throughout the ways that you are writing and working with therapists a lot about burnout.
Mhm.
And I think you said in your first phase of burnout after working in community health, you maybe said you didn't even deal with it. But then the second time around, you learned and wanted to like do something about it. So if you want to share some about your personal side or just share maybe how you're helping the therapist you work with.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to share that I have the lived experience because I think that helps therapists feel seen. I mean, like
Okay.
it's like zero judgment. I've been there.
Right.
Obviously, the warning signs are going to look unique to each person, but I think knowing that I've lived it and kind of clawed my way back out of it is important for people to know. And that's where the book Workaholic from Well Balanced came in because I was like, I need
Mhm.
strategies. I don't have a lot of time. It's not about quitting a job or taking a 6-week vacation. Like, that's not realistic to the population that I identify
Mm.
with, which is like type A driven
Yeah.
perfectionist folks. So my burnout journey started probably in 2017, if I had to pinpoint when it started. And then I didn't actually start getting better until
Well,
2019. So it took about 2 years for me to realize that something was not going to change without some drastic measure. I kind of ignored it, which is embarrassing, right? To say as a therapist, of like, oh, I'm telling people how to do self care and be healthy. And then I was like falling apart behind the scenes. So I actually put myself into a medical crisis because I just ignored it for so long. And then my spouse looked at me one day and said, I see you 7 hours a week. And I was like, what? So that was part of my TEDx of like burden of busyness. Like, I was just like giving my all to clients. I was an empty shell of a person when I got home. And so my home life looked rocky. But my
yeah.
clients didn't notice anything was amiss. They're like, you're great. I asked them, even the ones I had for years after, because I had a couple that were long lasting clients. I said, was there anything you remember about that time period? And they're like, nothing. It was great. You were here. You were present. And I was
Mhm.
like, how interesting that I was falling apart, but they couldn't see it
Yeah.
because it was all at home. So yeah, it took about probably a year and a half to claw out of that, starting in 2019. And then I started to feel the itch of burnout again in the pandemic because 2020, we all white knuckled it all the way through. And then in 2021, is when I really started to feel those warning signs again. Like, oh, I did a year of this. I had some workaholic tendencies show back up. I was trying to control my environment because we all wanted something to control and the
Mhm.
unknown. And then 2021, I was like, ooh, I've got to make a change. And so at that
Mhm.
point, I found financial therapy. And that was kind of my pivot to allow me to have less trauma work, still financial trauma, of course, but
Okay.
less long lasting client work, which I think made a
Okay.
huge difference for all the projects I want to do.
Yeah. No, yeah, it is all trauma is huge, right, for people, but when you're hearing the stories of, I would say, the worst of the worst kind of devastation, it does, in the school I work in, some kids' stories are just, you're like, I can't believe you're 8 and this is what you've lived.
Mm.
Yeah, and it really does affect you and you feel it in your sleep and in your thoughts and all of that. So, yeah, I think it's good. I feel like we can only take on so much of it, right? Because
Mhm.
we're human as well. So, yeah, well, thank you for sharing the personal side of that and how I like the word crawl out of it. It's probably
The imagery.
it's
Yeah.
messy and it's not always perfect and not always a steady incline, but
Yeah.
um
Well, and I've spoken to other people about this, and it's like we have to make behavioral changes, which takes time, right? That's part of
mhm,
this burnout recovery. It's not overnight, it's not with a change of job, and it's probably not a weekend or a vacation away that's going to make this
mhm,
different. It's like maybe a year for a lot of folks to like crawl their way out, change behaviors, but also are they in control of their work environment? I work for myself. So, like, the only person in my way was myself to be like, I need to
mhm,
change my schedule. I need to not work at 8 p.m. I need to do XYZ. But
yeah,
for listeners who work for someone else, what are the boundaries? Like, am I doing overtime? Am I working extra hours I shouldn't? Am I coming in early and staying late? Like, what can change to help them on their burnout recovery journey?
I
And where
know,
can they advocate for themselves? So I recognize for folks who work for themselves, it's a different journey than when you work for somebody else to come out of burnout.
right. Yeah, it's hard. It's almost like difference. You need assertiveness for sure if you're working for someone else of what you can handle and
Mhm.
that, looks different for everyone. So, Um, well, we talked about many, many things, and you are working with a lot of the newer counselors out there in Colorado. What would be some of the main tips or key points that you share with them that you would want all of our listeners to hear if they are new into this journey or perhaps in the middle of their own masters in counseling?
Yeah, so many things. Let's see if I can narrow it down. The first one is obviously getting clear on who they want to work with and how they want to work. So I think for a lot of people on the burnout recovery side of this, it's like, what's the ideal schedule we're moving towards? Maybe this is a year out, but do I not want to work Fridays? Do I want to see 18 clients a week instead of 40? Like, what is the goal? So we know what we're moving towards. And that kind of anchors people in the work of recovery and advocacy at workplace. For master's level folks, it's, knowing that they don't have to know what they don't know. So do they have a mentor? Do they have a supervisor? Do they have a consultant to help them on the journey so that they don't find themselves in a sticky situation? Like, if they're not going to go into community mental health and learn by fire, as I like to say, like throw you into the fire and you learn, then who do you have as your support network who's going to help you grow? Whether it's, I need to ask a question about mandated reporting or suicide assessment, or, hey, I'm feeling like I'm burnt out. What should I do? Having a support person, I think, is really important for green clinicians just starting the journey. We don't want them to burn out in the average of 7 years, which is what we know right now. Like most clinicians last 7 years in the field. I want to change that. That seems like a really short stint.
Right, right. Probably finally getting well established and know a lot of the things you were asking about, but then it's too much and you want to do something that maybe doesn't blow your mind every day. So, yeah. Those are good things for sure. Is there anything else that we didn't get to talk about today that you would want to share, or any other, books in the future or material that you would want us to know about?
Yeah, I mean, all of this lives on my website, which I'm sure you'll have in your show notes because people are like, wow, just like trying to figure out all the things. So suicide assessment, consultation on burnout, all the books are listed there, including the one that's launching later this spring, which is that Healing from Client Suicide book. So really heaviest topic I've ever written, but most heartfelt for clinicians to feel supported. So really excited to put that out there because we're not talking about it, and we're about to. But yeah, on the financial therapy side, if your listeners are mostly therapists, which I believe they are, if you have some work that you want to do around your own money story, I'm here for it. I'm available for consultation on that. It's really powerful to do some of this work as it then translates to our client work. So happy to be a resource for listeners if I'm a fit.
Yeah, no, thank you. And her website is Crossweight, that's one S, and then weight has an E at the end, Crossweight Counseling, PLLC.com. So yeah, I've been on there. There are lots of really great things where you could find links to her books and all of that. So thank you so much, Khara, for giving us your time today. And I feel like we got to hear about so many things in a very short time.
Thank you, Becky. I'm hoping it's helpful to people. And obviously, if they have questions, they know how to reach me. Thank you for having me.
Yes. No, we appreciate it. To our listeners, feel free to check out our website and all the episodes on Mastering Counseling, where we explore the world of counseling and therapy. Please leave us comments and continue to join us on social media for Mastering Counseling. This is Becky signing off on Have a Wonderful Day. Bye-bye.